Welcome back to Genshin Interact. Today we're going to be talking about the Abyss that has come out recently and looking at kind of each chamber, looking at certain teams and characters that we think have worked for us in our own personal try, as well as some teams that we think are going to work for this specific Abyss.
Losing the 50-50 is the worst feeling in Genshin. And I understand, believe me. That's why whenever I have nothing left and am in the dilemma of whether or not to spend, I use Loot Bar. Loot Bar is 100% safe and only requires your Genshin UID to purchase Genesis crystals. Normally, the price for me to buy 6,480 crystals is $100, but you can see here how Loot Bar has reduced the price to about $85, and if you're a new user, you get an additional 5% off. The way it works is that Loot Bar tops up your account through the official channel with Hoyoverse. After making a purchase, you can expect to receive it in 30 minutes or less. In my case, I received mine in just about 5 minutes. Another comforting thing about Loot Bar is that they are trustworthy and offer 24/7 live support. Other creators like Dukaja, Jello Impact, Supera Tom, Mujin, and Tevat Times have endorsed and used this product themselves, including both Vixen and myself. Just use the link in the description to get another discount on top of the already cheaper prices at purchase. Thank you Loot Bar for sponsoring today's video, and now, let's dive in.
So the first thing that we want to bring up, first and foremost, is going right over into the Abyss, obviously, for this time around. We're going to go right over. We're going to skip 9, 10, 11. We're going to go right over to floor 12. Something I do want to keep in mind before we jump into the different chambers is looking at the Blessing of the Abyssal Moon. Now, when a character receives healing, the character's attack is increased by 50% for 3 seconds. Keep this in mind because this is going to help for a lot of characters that are going to be doing small bits of healing instead of a huge amount of healing. So it's kind of the difference you'll see between characters like Bennett, who do a bunch of healing, versus Baiju and Chevrus, who kind of do small bits of healing. And that's basically going to help you because that'll help more instances of small healing, which is going to keep that 3-second buff because it's got a short cooldown time. It's got a short time period, so you want to have as much constant healing as possible. But besides that, Rift, what can you tell us about the first chamber?
Yeah, of course. So when looking at the first chamber, obviously, we know that the Abyss hasn't changed from the last reset. It's exactly the same. So if you've already gone through the Abyss, you were able to 36 that last Abyss, then you know exactly what you need to do. Just rinse, repeat, right? But yeah, once again, we have the triple Magu Kenki. I know this is the bane of some people's existence, which is fair because these guys can be quite annoying, especially with all the crazy attacks that they do. Getting some of those dodges in is definitely very, very difficult to time and all that stuff. But a lot of things that have worked, at least for me, and we'll honestly probably just talk about this for a majority of the video, a really good team for this is any kind of overload team, whether that is using Arlecchino as your driver or even Raiden as your driver. And there's even some other things you can do. You could do some 4-star only teams with the damage characters, like could just use Bennett, Chevrus, maybe Xiangling in there, and also Fischl has damage potential. If you have Yai Miko, she's a good candidate if you're using Arlecchino as your on-fielder, so you have a good Electro off-fielder. So there's a lot of options you can, just mix matching a lot of those Electro and Pyro characters. But really, Burgeon is a really great option for most of all of these chambers on all of floor 12. Burgeon has worked very, very good from my experience. I have built up Toma on a EM build, so it works like a charm. You can also do Burgeon Diluc. That works like a charm. And I think the trick with the Magu Kenki is, or maybe not the trick, but the catch is if you can keep them together, it makes your life a whole lot easier because you're able to kind of damage all of them at the same time for a much easier and faster clear altogether. On this first chamber of floor 12, it's really all about how much time can you save yourself for the second half, because I think honestly, while the Magu Kenki are hard, the second half is where it really starts to ramp up in difficulty just because they spread out these enemies in multiple waves. So it's really just a race against time.
I totally agree. I think the biggest thing that you're going to want to focus on, obviously, is Burgeon teams because it's just the AoE effect, as well as Overload is just because of how strong it is, with the double Pyro and the double Electro usually running. And especially with the characters that are usually your DPS characters. The second half of this, like Rich was just talking about briefly, you're going to start out by fighting 2 Kairagi, which are going to spawn in your first wave, and then your second wave is going to be 2 Fatui Pyro Skirmishers with a Mirror Maiden, and then a third wave, which is going to be these 2 Veteran Operatives. Now, like Rift was talking about, the issue that we were kind of talking about actually while we were doing this Abyss was the constant just wave. The Abyss has kind of changed over time. Before, they kind of used to just throw everything at you, and now over time, to kind of make it more difficult for you, they've kind of, instead of messing with the enemies and their difficulties, they've kind of just been putting them in waves so that it forces you to not hit everything at once and kind of use up everything at first and kind of force you to have good rotations as well as keep an eye on the time period like Rift was talking about. Looking into the second chamber, though, really quickly, the first half we're going to have is Capellius in this attack. So here, Capellius is going to be having a cryo shield, and as well in the normal overworld, he is Numa aligned, so you can use Usia attacks, someone like Navi or something like that, that can kind of get rid of his attack basically, or his shield that he's going to put up, and you can kind of put them in like, a downed state. But when you're actually in this, I tried it with multiple characters. I tried it with Numa and Usia aligned characters with my Neuvillette, with his skill, and then I tried it with my Navia as well. And there's a certain instance where you can basically have your Numa or your Usia kind of hit them while they're basically dancing at the beginning and kind of spinning around each other. But neither one of those attacks actually broke them up and kind of put them in a down state. Now, my thought is that you basically aren't allowed to basically put them in that down state just to make this chamber more difficult. And so you're going to probably put a lot of emphasis, at least on the first half, in my personal opinion, either on that Burgeon or Overload team. Pyro is going to be your best friend, constantly breaking that shield and then doing as much damage while that shield is down.
Yeah, I definitely think it's like what you said. Just so that Hoyoverse can make the Abyss harder, they're like, well, let's force the player to have to take down the shield by elemental means. And so because of that, having a cryo shield, once again, those Overload and Burgeon teams we talked about, you're naturally going to have a lot of pyro applications in teams like that. So if you've already decided to use a team like that for your first half through Chamber 1, then I think you're going to breeze through Capellius pretty easily. Just make sure you're doing your dash cancels correctly. You watch out for Capellia on the outside when she goes in the far outer circle, and she'll throw some of those animo attacks from afar or cryo attacks, whatever they are. Those can be difficult to dash, especially if you can't locate her. So with enough practice and enough tries, I think you can get through it with a decently powerful team, like using Arlecchino if you have her. She's a really great character. But moving into the second half of Chamber 2, you've got the Fadui Pyro agents, you've got some Eremites to deal with, and also the Abyss Lector with the Electro shields. So most people's initial problem when encountering this chamber is actually the Abyss Lectors, because it's really, once again, a race against time to just get the shields down, because you get them to close to dead, about 10%, just based off what it looks like from gameplay. And then they throw up that shield. That takes a lot of application from an opposite element like Pyro or Dendro to get it off. And so it can be kind of annoying, but there are several ways I think you can deal with that. Once again, Burgeon teams deal with it pretty effectively just because you have a lot of elements in there, and Pyro is a main factor in a Burgeon team. So once again, that's going to work really well. You can also use Bennett on 4-piece Thundering Fury. From my experience, this has worked very well, and very well also for other people. They've mentioned it in videos of theirs. I know I Win to Lose Gaming actually mentioned this, and I think it's something that we can easily forget about, but it's really a super easy way to get those shields down as quickly as possible, because you can just spam Bennett's skill on these Electro shields, and it does take care of it. Also, one other note about the second half of Chamber 2 is when you are fighting with these Eremites, just make sure that when they summon their pets, you're focusing on those, because it does increase their resistance to all forms of damage. So you want to prioritize killing the pets so they get in a down state and you can deal a lot more damage to them. And then as well with the Pyro agents, they have those Pyro shields that go up if you're not killing them in a quick manner. So once again, if you're using a Burgeon, I'm going to assume maybe you have a character like Xingqiu in there, or maybe even Yelan. That Xingqiu alone, for me, has been enough Hydra application to deal with all three of them if they are putting up those shields. You don't lose too much time. You can kill them before they put it up, but that can be pretty difficult. They go invisible and stuff like that. So just a few notes there. But moving on into Chamber 3, finally, the first half is honestly, and I think you would agree with me, Vixen, maybe I'll ask you about this, but from my experience, Chamber 3 first half has been the easiest half of any of these 6 different encounters. I don't know, what about you?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's been the easiest. It's not really that difficult, thankfully, which is a good thing, because it's more or less just a damage check. You do have, similar wave style, but thankfully there's nothing crazy about them, shield-wise and whatnot. I would worry about basically taking out those cryo gunners as fast as humanly possible so that they don't put up the cryo shield, so that you don't have to worry about it. And then the characters after that, or the enemies after that, aren't really that difficult. I know the Nobushi kind of dash around a little bit, but it's not a crazy amount like the operatives. The Eremite's a little annoying, but once again, if you can kind of just use a good damage check, if you're normally clearing the third chamber of floor 12, you should be fine most of the time here. But the second half of the third chamber is kind of the questionable one, I guess, that people kind of talk about, because the issue here is the Iniquitous Baptist. Now, with Iniquitous Baptist, he's a little bit of an annoyance, I think, for people because you need to have a good Hybrid Bloom or Burgeon, mainly Burgeon teams and Overload teams to really do extremely well. Now, the issue that can come across here is he starts out with Pyro Shield, is what he's going to start out with, obviously. And then as soon as he's done with his Pyro Shield, he'll go down into a down state for like a second or two. And then he'll put up, I believe, his Cryo Shield. And after you bring down his Cryo Shield, he'll go down for a second or two. Then he'll bring up, finally, his Electro Shield. Those three are the only instances of when that actually comes up, is just those three. And then he goes into a longer phase of going down, but it's not really too fun necessarily to deal with, especially at level 100 with the Iniquitous Baptist. You have to have either a really goated Burgeon team. If you have that, you should be doing perfectly fine. But if you're someone like me that kind of tried to force Hyperbloom through this, you're going to have a very, very hard time. I didn't even 36 star this actually when I tried to force my Alhaitham Hyperbloom team in this, and that was purely because of the Cryo Shield. I only had Kuki to really do my Electro application, and Hydro and Dendro did nothing to obviously bring down the Cryo Shield. So it's a little bit of an annoyance there. That's why Burgeon, which is what we talked about, has done extremely well, because that constant Pyro brings down Cryo and the Electro, and then the Dendro in that team also can bring down the Electro Shield. And then the Pyro Shield, obviously you're going to have Hydro in there to constantly break that through. And normally Hydro has a very, very good reputation for being a very high application scale.
Yeah, everything you said about that is pitch perfect, honestly, and maybe even from some of the gameplay we'll have up during this talk about the Iniquitous Baptist. I know I was able to clear this with a 4-star only team. I just did. I mean, once again, you're gonna hear it. Burgeon team. I did Xing Cho. I had obviously Toma in there, and then I had 2 Dendro characters. I believe I used Yao Yao, and maybe I used Nahida. I can't remember from what I did, but you'll see in the gameplay. But Yao Yao, Kave I even used. There's a lot of things you can do. Dendro Traveler, I know I used that one. So actually a quick note on that. If you are going to be planning to use Burgeon, you built that up, maybe your Toma, and you're deciding to use Dendro Traveler, maybe you don't have characters like Nahida. I totally get that. That's fine. If you're using Dendro Traveler, the key to using her correctly, or him correctly, whichever one you picked, right, is when you place down Traveler's Burst, you need to make sure you're putting Hydro on top of it as soon as you do it. Because if you hit that with Pyro, you're going to immediately cause it to go away. It's going to wither and do that kind of bigger explosion. If you were to read the skill description of the burst, when you do Pyro on Dendro Traveler's Burst, it just immediately goes away and deals a bigger... It's basically like a super Burgeon. So you need to make sure you're hitting it with Hydro so it can increase its radius, but also actually stay on the field. That's the most important part. You don't want to end up destroying it with some Pyro applications. So that's one little caveat there. It's honestly not that big of a problem. I wasn't experiencing too many problems with that, but and you'll probably just see from gameplay what I'm talking about. So yeah, all in all, kind of summarizing the entire Abyss, Overload and Burgeon, those are some key teams. I definitely think those are the top 2 teams for this Abyss. Maybe there's some other stuff you can do that will work. I know, like from my experience, for first half, I did do a Hu Tao Vaporized team. A Arlecchino Vaporized team, a regular Arlecchino Vaporized team should still work fine because it's still enough Pyro application from a Pyro DPS. So you're not going to have any issues with the Cryo Gunners in the first half of Chamber 3. Capellius, once again, with the Cryo Shield, no problems there. In the first half, well, you're just dealing a lot of damage, so I don't think you'll suffer too much. But other than that, yeah, this Abyss is really definitely favor of Pyro. That's for sure.
Well, that's everything we've got for this video, looking over this past Abyss. If you guys have any other ideas that you personally have used or found that have worked pretty well, go ahead and let us know down in the description if you found some teams that you particularly liked for the different halves or the different chambers. And if you did like the content, go ahead and like and subscribe. And we do have a Discord as well if you guys would like to go ahead and join that as well. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.